Hello, and welcome to the Partnership Project's NVR podcast. This is Season 3, Episode 8. I'm Jill Lubienski.
And I'm Peter Jakob.
And welcome to everybody, welcome to all our listeners. Today, Peter and I were thinking about talking about new developments in NVR. We were thinking, Peter, that as we look at the landscape of NVR, and particularly, with you've been there since pretty much the beginning of NVR, but we're now in 2023 and we have a lot of new practitioners coming up doing lots of exciting things. And we just thought it might take a moment to review the applications of NVR. And part of this, the driver for this for me is being fortunate enough to be part of the team that's evaluating our Level 3 accreditation module participants, and just being really so impressed with the range of diversity of application of NVR that they're bringing to the group. And I just thought it would just be, lots is going on here. But I'm also wondering, whether practitioners in the field might be feeling a little bit shy if they are applying NVR in unique and novel ways that maybe not be spoken about or written about quite as much.
It brings back to memory what you just said. I was working many, many years ago in a child guidance center in Germany with very, very qualified, superb colleagues who had subscribed to a particular kind of family therapy. And the things that I was doing at the time, solution-focused work, narrative therapy, and all that, I always felt like I'm not allowed to do that, or it isn't proper therapy, so I hid it. Whatever I do with clients in the privacy of the therapy room is a different matter from what I share with the team. And I remember that was very constraining. And ultimately, when I showed the other colleagues what I was doing, they were very open and interested. So I'm just wondering whether maybe some people might feel that if they do things that seem outside of the traditional NVR box, that might be wrong in some way, or that it might not be NVR or something, they shouldn't be doing. Do you get that impression?
I do, yeah. I think it's almost like people are a little bit afraid to say, well, I use some of the principles, here with this family where they had, for example, I don't know, a young person who has diabetes, and I'm not sure whether I can use, these principles. He's not taking his medication, and I was thinking, would I be able to apply the principles here? Or I've used some principles here, working with some of. I had this in the accreditation module. It was beautiful, using some of the imaginary methods with a young person in relation to a sibling who was, the sibling of a referred young person, to help that sibling gain some perspective on what that other sibling, the older child, might be going through, and also for the parent. And it was incredibly powerful, and it was almost like, I have a little hand over my mouth. I'm not sure I should have used it in this way. It's not the way, we were taught. But so creative, and people, the methods coming through people's interests, experience, the context in which they work. And I think giving people a forum in which they can talk about things, like you say, and have that response of, oh, this is exciting.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, relating to what you said about working with NVR with diabetes, the first time I heard about working with NVR with diabetes was in 2011, when I came across the work of Barbara Olofs, a German psychologist who works in child health, pediatric care. and who's done extensive work in that. So the colleague who was wondering whether they could use NVR for diabetes is in very good company,
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
in the company of one of the leaders of the field. That someone was using the imaginary methods, or some imaginary methods, to work with siblings. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that.
Mm.
I mean, Willem and I have carried out some workshops on the imaginary and embodiment methods that we've developed within NVR.
Mm.
But those are just examples of practice where we've applied them. Of course, it would be wonderful for people to use them in all manner of ways in working with NVR. There's a body of work that Irid Shore-Sapir did about working with siblings, but I'd never thought of bringing imaginary methods into the work with siblings. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Mm.
So
It's
I'm
a neglected area, Peter, isn't it? I think when this practitioner was talking about working with siblings, I think the whole group was sort of saying, this is an area we don't think enough about. So I think that's an area that's really ripe for more exploration. I'm sure there's work going on in the field because a lot of services are based on whole family approaches, aren't they? And practitioners are expected to work as much with, siblings and other parts of the family as they are with parents. So I think I would guess that there is some really creative work going on out there that could be talked about, written about, and inspire other practitioners more. There was certainly so much interest in the group about that.
So often parents feel between a rock and a hard place when they want to deal with the problematic behavior of one child, but it draws their attention away from the sibling who may at times be suffering very badly or maybe escalating with the interest child or both. It is such an important area. I was thinking of some things that I've found really useful, which is sometimes becoming the young person's resistance coach. So I was wondering whether that person may have used imaginary methods to coach the sibling in nonviolently resisting their their siblings' difficult behavior, harmful behavior. Was that what they were doing?
I think it was about de-escalation as well. I think more de-escalation. But tell me more about the young person's resistance coach. That's an interesting kind of thinking about.
One example was I at one point was working with the family with a young person who was showing harmful behavior within the family, but who was also being severely bullied by a group of other young people. He was sort of on the fringes of a gang, the other young people. And his sister and his sister's friends set themselves up in opposition to the other young people who were bullying him. And so there was an escalation between these two groups of young people in the whole town, to the point where the sister actually injured another young person. Police were involved and so forth. And we did a piece of work that involved the community police officer. Is that the right term?
Yeah.
And some of the parents on the other side, right? And the parents on my client's side. I think the listeners can't see the parentheses that I'm putting around that. Came together in the town hall under the facilitation of the community police officer to look at ways of resisting the young people's escalation. But importantly, also, I spent a day with the sister and her friends and the interest person, the boy in question, basically training them in nonviolent resistance. How could they resist the bullying of this boy, but nonviolently? It was really interesting because one of the girls, so towards the end of the day, said, "I've got it. This works better because then the others can't hit back so much." And that really struck me as so valuable. And we sort of reinforced it because I was then invited by the head teacher of the school, which of course had been affected by this conflict, to speak about nonviolence at assembly. So I did an assembly to speak about, to sort of, create more of a context, and strengthen that kind of discourse. And it got better, it started.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Peter. That's really interesting. And I know that you've been working more on those wider contexts, haven't you, of NVR? So moving out from the nuclear family out into, do you call them vectors of? Was it vectors of resistance? Yeah, vectors of resistance. And I guess we're coming more into the social and political, aren't we? The place where NVR and the family originates. And we're kind of having that movement out into it's never not been there, but it kind of maybe being more explicit about how we connect our ideas more with that wider systemic context, and necessarily so in our current climate, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt very early on in the early 2000s that just focusing on the parent and child dyad and the support network alone perhaps does the child an injustice if the child has experienced high levels of adverse circumstances.
Yes.
And those become kind of an elephant in the room. Like we know that this has happened, but that's not interesting. What's interesting is the actual behavior in the here and now. Yet, for the child, psychologically, the neglect or abuse they may have experienced is not finished. It hasn't come to a conclusion. And that's what at the time led me to think of child-focused practices. But I think it goes much further. We often see institutional practices that are counterproductive. I think Haim Omer early on mentioned them as a risk factor for child-to-parent violence. And he referred to it as therapists who treat parents unkindly. And I think it's not just about therapists. I think it's about professionals, institutions. I think it's not about individual malice often. I think most professionals, apart from a very few who are actually quite dangerous and coercive, that does happen. But most professionals, I think, want the best for the family and for the young person. But their organization is often structured in such a way that they end up practicing in ways that can be counterproductive or even harmful. I think an example that one comes across again and again is parents turning towards social services, telling them, "My child hits me," or "We don't know what to do." And then a child protection investigation being launched.
Yeah.
And parents then feel very negatively affected by that. They double think anything they do with their child. They lose even more presence with their child.
Yeah. And I think there's an extra layer if that parent is an adoptive parent and they've come to parenting through quite a lot of scrutiny of their family home, family life, their background, all of the things about them as people. And I've come across situations where parents have never felt not scrutinised. It's almost like there's an invisible eye still in
Uh-huh.
the home. So, and then there's an allegation, something happens. As you just said, that the system can only work in this kind of clunky way where it's the parents that become the target, so they are then investigated on child protection. And what that does then to the relationship between the parent and the child is further distance the parent from the child, to feel like they, like you say, loss of presence. They're immobilized almost by the
Uh-huh.
scrutiny of the system around them. I think I remember in my training, the panopticon, the idea of Foucault of
Yeah.
how control happens. So we have
Yeah.
this internalized idea of being watched, don't we? The many eyes upon us from
Yeah.
society. And I think for many of our parents, that's a reality as well as a kind of thing
Yeah.
that's going on inside them. Very, very difficult for them.
How do parents talk about how they feel affected in an emotional way? I mean, you've just said that there's distance between the parent and the child. They lose further presence. They feel observed, or I
Mm.
think that in the panopticum, there's that self-censorship, isn't
Yeah,
there?
right. Yeah,
How,
definitely.
how do parents say that they feel affected emotionally?
Well, I'm the parent I've got in mind particularly. I think it's turned inward. It's almost like a kind of it becomes a depressive sort of
Mm-hmm.
kind of position, really. That there's a disconnection from the child, so not reaching out, not being the parent the child needs, not being there, not being physically, mentally present for the child, or for
Yeah.
themselves. It's like a disconnection and a withdrawal. That's what I've observed, a kind of coming in. So that perhaps the only thing I've got is myself, and I just withdraw.
So if I put myself in the shoes of a child protection professional
Mm.
and am maybe not aware of the fact that the family does not exist outside of me, that I've become part of the system,
Mm.
I might see a parent who then appears depressed and think further, oh, I'm really concerned about her parenting
Mm.
because she is showing signs of depression. I think we need a mental health assessment.
Well, that's exactly what happened, and that further quite enraged the parent. Actually, this this complete misunderstanding of what you've just talked about. That sort of the impact of all of that on them was construed of go and get that mental health help you need, and then we'll be all
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah. Without an awareness that
Mm.
I may be part of what is actually um, causing this or inciting it or feeding into it. You mentioned Foucault's panopticum. I'm not sure whether all listeners are familiar with
No,
that.
probably not a good thing to say, is it? It's just what came to mind. Yeah, yeah.
Should we just briefly describe what it's about? Do you
Mm.
want to?
Well, could you do that? Because I think you probably explain it better than me. I just,
Yeah, I don't know.
have that. I'll get my book out and give you and give you the description.
From what I remember, Foucault writes about this prison design
Yeah,
in which there is a spiral walkway
yeah.
on the outside of a tower, and inside of the spiral walkway are prison cells. And so the prisoners cannot hear the guards walking because it's a walkway rather than steps. And the guards can look into the prison cells at any time, but the prisoners do not know that they are looked at. And there is great uncertainty about the rules. So prisoners will be punished if they break rules, but they never know quite what the rules are, and the rules change in a way that's seemingly arbitrary. So the prisoners then internalize this rather extreme form of control and cease to act in any way that is spontaneous or natural. And the idea behind this prison design was that it would save prison staff, because ultimately the prisoners become their own jailers. And I think that really, using the panopticon, I think you very aptly described how a parent could feel in such a situation, what they could experience internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't discount that, can we? When you were saying earlier about always being a bit uncomfortable with the kind of here and the now ideas in NVR, let's just deal with the behaviour. But what a disservice we do to families, really, if we don't take into account all of these other factors that are impinging on what's going on. That child protection system that clunkily, it's almost like once it's got in motion, it can't not be. It's got its own momentum, hasn't it? Off it goes. And even very good people in that system are crushed by the wheels of it, I think.
Well, absolutely, because I think it can end up causing moral distress to the professionals working within that system. And I guess if we think of NVR as just located in the parent-child dyad, in the triad between two parents and a child, in that triangular set of relationships, and the support network, or the way I've come to call it, the caring community around the family, then we may be overlooking some of those vectors of resistance. And I think resistance to counterproductive institutional practices is one such vector. I worked with parents, it was this year actually, who made an announcement to the professionals around them. Because that's another thing, isn't it? When kids display harmful behavior, often we get this huge sort of mushrooming kind of situation with more and more professionals becoming involved.
Yeah.
And they made an announcement to all professionals involved, in which they described some of the practices that were harmful to them, that they had spoken about, but that had not changed, and how from now on they were no longer going to accept those practices, what they were going to do about it. And it had an immediate effect in terms of the responses of key professionals who really started reflecting their own position and became, in a positive way, more careful. And it had an immediate effect on the relationship between the parents and the interest child, because the parents stopped double guessing.
Yeah.
And drew from their natural resources more, so they felt empowered. That doesn't mean that all the problems disappeared.
No.
But what had been added on to the problems, that became ameliorated.
And I was just thinking that for those professionals that took that position, Peter, it wouldn't have been just one person. Presumably there was was it a team, or was it? Because I was thinking there's a danger in one isolated professional making an announcement into a system which is so, has such a heavy hand. How,
Yes.
as a professional, we also need to get our own team to help us with these kind of resistance acts, don't we, into bigger systems, into quite oppressive systems, really. We working alone is going to be quite a scary thing to do, and perhaps quite dangerous to us professionally and reputationally. And how did they do it? Did they work together, or was it?
Well, what happened was that the announcement was also presented to the chair of the Child Protection Review Conference. And it was both the chair and the actual key professional. I don't want to give too
No,
much
no,
detail
no, absolutely.
for confidentiality's sake. The key professional who both showed a change of heart
Right.
as a result of that. So the child protection review conference chair sort of backed up the individual other professionals' new repositioning. Ultimately, as
Yeah.
we say in systemic terms,
Yeah.
they both repositioned themselves, and the one felt supported by the other, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would imagine. I didn't speak to them about it.
No, no. Yeah.
I think another aspect of looking at nonviolent resistance is how we write professional reports,
Yeah.
because I think that the contexts that the discourses in the organizations that we write the reports for might set the framework for our reports. In other words, if their perspective is it's all about the parenting, then we might just write a report about the parenting. Or if their perspective is it's all about how the child feels, then we might just write about those things. But we might not write about how we understand the impact of that agency's interaction with the family on the family dynamics.
Mm.
We might think it's not professional to write about that in our professional report. We might think it's outside of our remit. But the question is it outside of our remit?
Mm.
And where there has been intransigence on the part of an institution, can we, or maybe from a nonviolent point of view, are we not responsible
Mm.
to highlight, as we understand it from a professional point of view, that impact? And does our report then not become an act of nonviolent resistance?
Mm.
Do
Mm.
we then not become resistors within the larger system in which we operate?
Yeah. Yeah. Big questions, Peter, aren't they? About
Yeah.
professional accountability and responsibility. And I think I always come back to that in NVR. It's, what kind of positions do we take in terms of our own agency and responsibility with families, and then how we position ourselves with the professionals in the network. And it's so important, isn't it? And it's all nonviolent resistance. It's
Yes,
all of the
exactly.
same kind of cloth.
And the nice thing, the lovely thing is that NVR offers a structure for resistance by virtue of the methods.
Mm.
We have this whole set of really wonderful methods which can become like a vehicle.
Yeah.
We can adapt them and we can adjust them.
Mm. Mm.
So I would think colleagues who are looking at using any of the methods, that we have in NVR, using imaginary methods to work with siblings, helping siblings perhaps to learn to de-escalate
Mm.
and ultimately become NVR resistors,
Exactly that.
because de-escalation is part of NVR. Um, Colleagues who need to deal with institutions that perhaps show counterproductive behaviors, people who are dealing with, like in that other example, conflict between young people in the town.
Mm. Mm.
Insofar as any of these issues affect the well-being of the family members of the family that we work with, are they not part of our remit?
Yeah.
And can we not apply our NVR methodology to these various avenues?
And I think on that note, Peter, we can leave our listeners to think more about these really important areas for themselves, because I suspect there's lots going on in all of these frames.
And maybe we could encourage them to write in and bring up some examples in their own practice that they would like us to discuss, or questions.
How great that would be. We'd love that. Yeah. Some listener questions on this, on these developments in NVR and the wider system and how you're using it creatively. We'd be really welcoming that. Yeah, great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's goodbye at this point. Hope you found this a stimulating conversation, and see you next time. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.